Do you ever wonder if Posh Spice just fancies slumming it for a while? You know, like eating a kebab while wearing an hoodie. What about Baby Spice? Do you ever think she wishes she could grow up? I mean, she is 47 now. What about Ronald McDonald? Do you think he ever fancies a Burger King? Or the Colonel? Do you think he ever thinks about going vegetarian? You know, giving the chickens a break? What about Mr. Motivator? Do you think he ever just fancies kicking back and relaxing, you know, taking off the neon spandex and putting on some nice lounge pants? Does Mr. Grumpy ever want to crack a smile? Does Sneezy ever take Piriton? I'm guessing these are probably not the sorts of questions that are keeping you up at night. But it's funny how some people become known for a specific personality trait. Oh, yeah, him. Yeah, he's a bit dozy, that one. Not much going on upstairs, if you know what I mean. Oh, you want to be careful with her. She does love a gossip. Oh, no. No, they think way too much of themselves. Stay away from them. Some people make these kinds of assumptions about others, don't they? They reduce them down to a single thing, maybe based on something they've heard or something they've seen them do in the past. And sometimes we even allow the things that are said about us to define the way that we see ourselves, to impact our identity. And we're left wondering, is this really who I'm supposed to be? We've been looking the past couple of weeks at some of the sayings that have impacted our identity as a church. Words that we often use to remind us of the kind of community that we want to be. Not that we always get it right. Sometimes we forget to show gratitude or use grace, but that's okay. We're all on this journey together, right? Sometimes all we need to do is stop and realign ourselves with who it is that we want to be. Remind ourselves that we are more than the mistakes that we make. And that's kind of what today's defining words are all about. I want us to look again at our identity and for us to ask, is this who we are supposed to be? These are today's words. You'll never know who you are until you know whose you are. It's a clever bit of wordplay that we've used on quite a few occasions in this church. And much like the church is the hope of the world, our defining words from week 1, I think this particular phrase needs a few caveats. Because I'm not saying that you can't know anything about yourself apart from God, or even that submission to God is the thing that will bring complete clarity to your life. Jesus said, follow me. It's a journey. It's a process of discovery that takes our whole lives. But I think what these words are doing is pointing us towards the idea that God knows more about who he created us to be than anyone else. God is the leading authority on you. The first time this idea comes up in the Bible is actually on page 1. Well, it would be page 1 if they didn't include the contents and acknowledgements and all of that other stuff. But contained within the beautiful Hebrew creation poem of Genesis 1 are these words. Let us, that's God speaking to himself, make mankind or humankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock, over the wild animals, and over the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth and subdue it. rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. You are created in the image of God. What does that mean? Well, it means that your life is designed to reflect the nature of the divine. When we think of an image, we probably imagine like a photograph if we're a certain age, or maybe like an Instagram post if we're a different age, but something flat or static. Dots of ink or pixels arranged by a lens designed to capture light. But the image that we see in Genesis 1 is not static, it's dynamic. It's given agency to act and reflect the power and purposes of God in creation. Just look for a moment at the image of God that is so beautifully imagined in the verses preceding this one. The poem begins by telling us that the earth was formless and empty, and that darkness was over the surface of the deep, and that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters when God said, "Let there be light." The first image we are given of God is that he is the bringer of light. Before there was darkness and emptiness, but when God speaks, everything changes. Later, when John recorded his gospel, he calls Jesus the light that shines in the darkness. He said the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. And then later, when Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount, he said to those gathered, those listening to him, "You are the light of the world. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Because we are made in his image. Just like God, we bring light to the darkness by reflecting what God has given to us. Then what happens? Well, God begins to create things, to imagine things that have never been seen or heard of before. He begins with plants and trees, and verse 12 specifies that it's trees that are made with seeds. He didn't just create life, but life with the potential for more life. And again, in his gospel, John said of Jesus, "In him was life, and that was the light of all mankind." Later, he records Jesus saying, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." As image bearers of God, we have the power to create life, not just in a reproductive sense, although that is also true, but by what we bring into the world. And then God creates everything else. Ants and antelope, elephants and eagles, frogs and flamingos, swordfish and sheep, endless, boundless creativity, wonder all around. And again, John says of Jesus, "Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made." Jesus' creativity can be clearly seen in his life, in the words that he spoke, in the stories that he told, in the ways that he showed love and created community. He created hope and joy and thankfulness and belonging and peace, things that led to more life for those he encouraged. And he encourages us to do the same. This is what it means to be made in the image of God, that we would be those that bring light and create life wherever we go. But of course we have a choice, don't we? We're all made in the image of God, every single one of us, and that will never change, but there are things that can obscure the image of God within us. If you imagine yourself for a moment as a mirror made to reflect light, it's like dust gathering on the surface and making us dull. So for the rest of this talk, I want to explore with you a few things that I think get in the way of God's image within us. And the first one is this: sometimes we don't value ourselves as we should. Here's the thing: God has already given you the highest status he can bestow upon you. To be made in the image of God is no small thing. In fact, it's the highest compliment you can receive. God believes that you are capable of carrying his light and life to others. He thinks you're great, by the way. He told me so in this book he helped write. Look at the words in 1 John 3. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. Yet, often, sadly, we see ourselves as less. Sometimes we imagine ourselves as unworthy, unlovable, like those who have been cast aside, consigned to the attic to sit in silence all alone. And I think there are various reasons why we don't value ourselves as we should. Perhaps others have spoken words over us that were untrue. Sometimes we can carry labels from our youth or from our past relationships, or even perhaps from family members, people who have had this profound influence in our life and unfortunately transferred some of their own brokenness onto us. Who've told us things about ourselves that maybe we have come to believe are true, like there's something inherently wrong or different about us, like we are somehow insufficient or even incapable of change. And these kinds of words can leave us feeling trapped, unable to see the truth of who we really are. Maybe it's not words, but false expectations that have damaged the way that we see ourselves. Maybe you were told that you would have a particular career or a particular lifestyle, and things just haven't worked out that way. If you grew up in church, maybe someone spoke something over your life and told you it was prophecy, told you that it was God's will for you. And now that that hasn't happened, you've been left wondering, what did I do wrong? Nothing. They were wrong. God still loves you, and you are still made in his image. Maybe you just expected that life would be easier. And I'm sorry that it's not, but that doesn't change who you were meant to be. Perhaps it's not words or expectations that are causing you to devalue yourself, but comparison. Sometimes we think if I could just be more like them, then everything would be okay. You know, if I had the face of Brad Pitt, or the body of Chris Hemsworth, or the mind of Stephen Hawking, or the money of Jeff Bezos, then I'd be sorted. Then I'd be okay. But God has made you to be you. He's placed his divine spark in you. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are beloved by God. Now, the way that God is reflected in you may not look the same as someone else, but that doesn't mean that you're any less valuable or beautiful or worthy. When we allow other people to define our worth, we can be left wanting. But when we remind ourselves of who God has created us to be, we know that we have everything we need. We are exactly who we are supposed to be. The next thing that I think can obscure the image of God within us is when we choose to reflect the wrong things. Because as beings created in his image, we are most ourselves when we choose to pattern our lives after him. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to grow a long white beard and start wearing oversized robes or sandals if you want that Jesus look. Nor do we need to change every single thing about us. As I've already said, God made you to be you. But there are most certainly things that can prevent us from living up to our full potential. If we're not careful, instead of bringing light and creating life, we can end up bringing darkness and destroying life. We have free will, and every choice we make has a consequence. When the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Colossae, he encouraged them to live up to their potential, to examine themselves and ask some hard questions. Let me read to you his words from chapter 3 of Colossians. He says this: "Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but Now you must rid yourselves of such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and put on your new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge, in the image of its creator, created in God's image. Here there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian or Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, with kindness, with humility, with gentleness, with patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them together in perfect unity. Notice what he says there in verse 12. As God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. He is reminding us of the identity that we already have in Christ. He doesn't say, if you are compassionate, humble and kind, then you will be holy and dearly loved. No. He's saying, because you are holy and dearly loved, choose to live a life that reflects that reality. He's speaking of taking off this old self and putting on a new one, right? You know, like when you go shopping and find a new coat that just sort of fits you perfectly, lets you see yourself in a new light, and you get this kind of new swagger until you see the price tag and then quickly put it back. But this new self, it's not burdensome to us. It's not a chore or something cumbersome designed to weigh us down. When we choose to put on the garments that God has made for us, it makes us more ourselves than we ever thought possible. That's why Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I'm humble and gentle in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Giving up those things in our life that have only ever led to darkness or death, and exchanging them for the things that lead to more light and more life, helps us to recognize who we are truly meant to be. When we reflect the right things, we discover the best version of ourselves, and it feels good. The final thing I want to suggest to you today that obscures the image of God within us is that sometimes we can forget our purpose. In that creation poem we looked at earlier, it spoke of us not only being made in the image of God, but us being given a particular responsibility within creation. It talks of us subduing the earth and ruling over the fish, birds and animals, which to me comes across as a little bit authoritative, right? Like we have to somehow try and keep all the animals in line. I don't know if you've ever tried that with fish, but it's quite tricky. They tend to swim away. But I guess there are different ways of ruling, right? When we picture some of the old kings, we think of great castles and splendid courts and servants and guards and armies and taxation and power plays, the wealthy elite ruling over the common folk, the peasants with an iron fist. And I guess even today, those in charge are not generally known for their generosity or selflessness, their honesty or integrity, are they? But Jesus was also called a king, and his method of ruling looked very different from our own. Jesus didn't insist upon his own authority. He ruled by laying down his life for the sake of others. We don't see him raising up an army and fighting for control. We see him raising up a church to serve the least, the lost and the lonely. Jesus didn't demand that people follow his royal decrees. He invited them to follow him and learn how to live well. Jesus didn't keep his followers in line by creating a culture of oppression and fear. He encouraged them to grow in faith and love. We don't see him sitting in a throne room or surrounding himself with finery. Rather, he relied upon the hospitality and generosity of strangers. He didn't keep people at a distance, only opening the palace doors Once in a while, he went to where the people were. He lived among them. He didn't strut around on horseback wearing a royal robe. He sat on a donkey and looked like a carpenter. He didn't have an army of servants to cater for his every whim. Instead, he got on his hands and knees and washed his disciples' feet. He didn't debate with his advisors the best way to serve the populace. He actually got out there and met the needs of strangers. He didn't attend fancy dinner parties filled with important dignitaries. He ate with tax collectors and sinners. His face was never printed on coins, or his name was never plastered on buildings. Instead, he told people stories that lived in their hearts. He didn't protect the wealth of the wealthy. He satisfied the needs of the hungry. And he didn't claim the land through acts of violence. He claimed the whole world through the ultimate act of sacrificial love. Jesus ruled like no one else. He is the one that reveals our purpose to us. Listen to what he said to his followers. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you may go and bear fruit that will last. And so whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. Later, the Apostle Paul reflected, we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works which he prepared in advance for us to do. Our purpose is to follow Jesus' command to love each other well, to lay down our lives for each other, to become so secure in the knowledge of God's love for us that we lose our fear of making ourselves less, that we might love as Jesus loved. Sometimes I think when we forget our purpose, we end up fighting for the wrong things, fighting to be right, fighting for control, fighting for power, fighting for our own rights, that our will be done, that our kingdom come. But the purpose that God has given us is that we would love this world and everyone in it. We need to remember that. So, in summary, you'll never know who you are until you know whose you are. You are made in the image of God. Every single one of you. And you're beautiful, holy and dearly loved. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You are made to reflect the light of God and to create life wherever you go. But be careful that you don't end up reflecting the wrong things, that you clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And remember that you have been given a purpose in this life: to love as you have been loved. So make sure you're not fighting for the wrong thing or fighting in the wrong way. Choose to live up to all that God has created you to be, and you might just discover the best possible version of yourselves.